Hirschberger, host of the 20 Mile March podcast, and on today's episode, I have my guest, Bryan Armentrout, and he has a book out called The New Manager Mindset, How to Master the 4 Secrets of Leadership That College Doesn't Teach You. That's one of the things that he's released, and we're in Denver here at this entrepreneur gathering, and I'm taking this opportunity to meet and talk with him and bring him onto the episode here. So Bryan, thanks for coming on to the show.
Awesome. Thanks, Gabriel. Glad to be here.
Bryan, give me your 1 or 2 sentences of like who are you and how do you describe yourself to people?
How do I describe
myself? Because if I were to describe you, I know I would just like totally miss it. I know you're food quality assurance, food guy with a lot of expertise here. You're an author, entrepreneur, but I want to make sure you say it in your voice, in your words.
Mm-hmm. Well, so I would say, like most people in life, you never end up where you think. So when we're younger, you plot out your life, and I'm going to go to college, and here's what I'm going to be. And what I've found is with most people, something happens along the way that changes that course. So for me, there's been a couple of main ones with that. The first one was in college. So I was a pre-med major. Original plans when I was younger was I was going to become a radiologist and be a doctor and all that type of stuff. Decided in college, that's not really for me. And then fell into a career in food. Wasn't planning it in any way, but I had the scientific background. I'm a microbiologist and started working for a food company in their laboratory, testing products for salmonella and listeria and stuff like that to make sure it's not there. And that's how my career kind of started. And did that for working in various capacities in the food industry for over 20 years. And then really started working on that next passion in my life, which is entrepreneurship. When I was younger, I went to a seminar with a friend of mine, and they were selling vending machines. So just the little 25-cent machines you see in restaurants at the front where you can get some candy and stuff like that. And so, of course, they were going to make their money on selling you the machines. And I went there with a friend of mine, and we started a business, and we would go door to door to restaurants, and we would share revenue with them on the machines and write them a check for the commissions once a month and service the machines. And it was great. I loved it. Mm-hmm. And then an offer came up for a promotion at another company, and I gave the rest of the company to my friend and went and pursued my career. So it was an interesting inflection point in my life. But that entrepreneurial spirit and that feeling of owning something and knowing that people were putting money in those machines and it didn't matter where I was at or what I was doing was a great feeling.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's like passive income coming in, like these machines. Mm-hmm. So you had a bunch of these machines out there. How many did you have?
It wasn't a whole lot. I think we were probably in at our peak about 20 restaurants.
Okay.
But what's interesting is, just like in most things in life, the 80-20 rule applied there. So the vast majority of our profits came from 2 or 3 of our main restaurants that we serviced.
And these were the ones that you put the quarter in and you turn it and you got the candy out?
Exactly. Yeah. So the small little machines, the ones that are like about a foot tall, and you could get gum or mints or things like that. And we figured out, buying the machines early on from the people who put on the seminar, was they were charging us way too much. So we figured out how to get the machines ourselves and buy bulk candy. And we started making our own stands and making them better. So we improved upon it too.
Is there really much to do except refill the machines? Once they're placed and empty the money, I guess?
Pretty much, yeah. So then you got a whole bunch of quarters, and you have to roll them up and take them to the bank and all type of stuff.
Did the restaurants take a cut, or what?
That was part of the pitch. So when we would go into the restaurant, we'd say, "Hi, we'd love to put this machine in here. No expense to you. We'll take care of the machine. We'll fill the machine. It'll look beautiful, and for that, we'll give you, I forget what it was, like 20%." Of the profits, and we'll write you a check every month. Mm-hmm. And so we were always very diligent in making sure that we did that.
Mm-hmm. Every kid I see that's leaving a restaurant is that's 3 years of age or so. They stop immediately and see that colorful candy, and they just beg their mom, please give me that, can I have some of this? And they're like, no, we're fine, we got this. But then you got some that are like, because if the kid throws a fit and they want to avoid that, they're going to be like, yeah, let's put this quarter in. And that's easy. Get this kid this.
Yeah, pain and reward for the parent. Yeah, spend a quarter and shut the kid up for a bit. Absolutely. Yeah, we were capitalizing on that.
I've always wondered how those things, what the story was behind those things. Yeah. they're everywhere, and I've seen them everywhere, but I've never talked to anybody who actually had anything to do with those machines. Why'd you get out of it?
So I was working at a company. I was working in the laboratory. And when you work at a company, this happens to everyone. They have a certain view of who you are and what you do within that company. And in a lot of ways, once you get stuck in that, you're stuck. So I was the microbiologist working in the lab, and I had some other opportunities as well. But I realized that if I was going to advance my career, I'd probably have to look outside. So at the time, I wasn't really out there marketing myself or sending resumes out to other companies. They approached me and said, hey, we've got this offer and we'd really like to talk with you. So I said, okay, fine. And so I'd been at the company I was at for 8 years at that point. Went back and talked with them there in Pennsylvania. And then they offered me the job and say, oh, by the way, we'd like you to head up quality for our entire company. So I was like, well, wow, okay, great. Let me talk with my girlfriend at the time, my wife now. And we talked.
Let me pause you for a second.
Yeah.
Like, did you not like what you were doing? Like, a lot of people would stop right there and say, I'm happy being a microbiologist, and like, that's my career. I make a good living that way. Or did you have something that said, like, this is not the life that I want still? There's still something else? Or were you not satisfied? Or what was it that why are you even looking?
That's a really good observation. Thank you. Part of what I've trained my quality managers over the years is what I call the 10-80-10 rule. And the numbers don't really matter. It's more the principle behind it. Is that in any given area, and the more people, the better for representation, but 80% of people who perform a job are happy doing their job. They like what they do. They enjoy what they do. They put in their hours. And they go home at night and they play with their kids and they are on the baseball team on the weekend and their life is happy and they're satisfied. And that's great. Make sure they have what they need to keep them happy. There's another 10% who are actively looking to grow and what they're doing doesn't satisfy them and they want more. You can identify those people by they challenge the system. They're looking for better ways to do things and they're constantly looking. Those are the important people in any organization. And if you have those people on your team and everyone does, you need to find them. You need to help them grow. Because if you don't, like me, they're going to leave. And that's what happened to me. Now, on the other side of the bell curve, and it's not 10%, it's much, much smaller. There's a group of people who are there to game the system. And we all know these people. They take every sick day. They're going to do the minimal amount of work they can. It's personified in the attitude of, I'll work harder if you pay me more. When it's actually the opposite. Show me your value and your worth, and then you get paid more. But they don't understand that lesson. Those people need to find something that's better suited to what they want to do, and it's usually somewhere else.
Okay, so you're in the 10% that were needing to be challenged, looking for more and more growth, more opportunity.
Yes. So in the lab, I became an excellent microbiologist, and I was very, very good at what I was doing. And
I noticed you paused before you said excellent. Like, what was going on in your head there? Were you?
I think I was just searching for the right word.
The right word. Yeah.
No context there.
No context there. Okay.
So I remember in the lab, so you do the same tests every week. And in any job, you have that repetitive function. And in the beginning, you learn new ways to do it and you become very efficient at it. But that curve begins to flatten out. And there's only so many more improvements you can do in that role. And I remember in particular one day, so when you test for salmonella, so for example, at the company I was working for, they would make powders. So whey powders and lactose powders and things like this. And you would have to look for salmonella to make sure that it was safe. And you have to deal with very large samples to do that because you're looking for something that's very, very small from a sample size standpoint. And you had these large buckets and you would mix up the powder with sterilized water and you'd incubate it. And hopefully if there's any bacteria there, you're going to find them. And so it's this cycle then of mixing this up and incubating and taking your sample and then washing them and re-sterilizing them and continue using these buckets. And they were like about a 5-liter bucket, so pretty good size. And you're using lots of these. And one day I was in the lab and I was doing the test and doing my morning routine. And I looked at one bucket in particular. And I said, how many times have I washed, sampled, and ran through this cycle with this one particular bucket? 50 times, 100 times? Because you use it until the plastic actually degrades to the point where it falls apart. And I'm like, I bet I've used this particular bucket 300 times. Do I want to keep doing this? Do I want to be that bucket?
It became a symbol for your career, your job, your life at that point.
Right. So if you have, and this is one of the key lessons I learned in my book, is at that point in time, I was a single contributor. I was very, very good at what I did, but it was that world that I lived within. And in order to expand that, I would have to move to the next stage in my career, which was leading other people to do that. So that's the point in time I made the conscious decision to really make that leap.
You mentioned the book again, The New Manager Mindset. Where can they purchase this book?
You can purchase the book on Amazon. It's available on Amazon. And also I am, for a limited time, I'm doing a free offer where people can get the book for free. So if you go to FSMA expert, go there and give me your information. I'll send you the book for free. All I'm asking is a little help with the shipping and handling, and I'll fire that off to you.
Mm-hmm. That's awesome. That's cool, because I just got this book in my hands today, and I haven't had a chance to read it yet, but it looks like there's a lot of stuff that people can learn about becoming a manager. And I've never been a manager, never worked at that level. I was like the drum major in school, and I was in charge of the band, and so I had to kind of motivate my team, and but that was I was 18, 17 years old, and so, but I'm just going to turn to this some random page in here and talk about, see what we can come up with here. So here we have this box here, management mini lessons. This is in section 1, the philosophy of business in Aristotelian. How did I do with that?
Aristotelian.
So I totally messed it up. An Aristotelian lean. And that's there's this great box that says management mini lesson. In most situations, it is better to wait, gather the facts, the reality, and process a situation with your team than to make emotional snap decisions. That makes sense. And I think you're saying your premise is that a lot of the times managers are making these emotional snap decisions too often and too frequently. Right. Mm-hmm. So is that something that you could talk a little bit about?
So part of the false view of managers in the world is that you're a decision maker and that you need to make a decision on that point. Most people feel that there's a lot of weakness in saying, I don't know. And that's not true. Being able to sit down and have your team bring you information and analyze it and then think about it is really important. And it's also a potential learning lesson for your reports as well. So if someone comes to you with a problem, should you solve it? Maybe, maybe not. A lot of times it's much more beneficial to sit back, hear what they have to say, and then say, that's very interesting. What do you think we should do about that? And I already may have a good idea of what I would like to do in that situation, but it's much better to teach that person how to do that themselves. So as a manager, if you teach your team to say, all right, when you come to me with a problem, it's not your job to simply give me your problem. Your job is to come to me. I will assist with your problem, but I also expect potential courses of action from you on how we're going to deal with that problem. So you're involving them on the critical decision-making process associated with that and helping them develop the skill set that they're going to need once they advance. So part of what I always do with people on my team is my goal is I want to help them become promoted. So I've been very lucky over the years to help people and mentor them and help them develop their careers. And for me, there's nothing more satisfying than that. To have people who used to work for me become directors and vice presidents and help continue on what I've been doing. And as a result of that, too, there's a loyalty that transcends companies. So I know that at any point in time, I can call up anybody who used to work for me and ask a question of them, and they'll happily answer it. So that's always great, too.
Oh, yeah. And so it's not really about you, the manager. It's really about teaching and bringing up those supervisors, those workers that you are in charge of, right?
Absolutely, because part of people want to jump to the conclusion. Is that the right conclusion? Who knows? Now, once you get farther up in the organization, those decisions become even more important. So at one point in my career, I was vice president of quality for a major consumer packaged goods company. I had, at one point, 17 different production facilities, 40 different co-packers who were making products for us. The budget in my department, just at the corporate level, was, I think it was at that point in time, around $3.5 million. The overall two divisions that I was in charge of in that company had annual revenue of around $3.2 billion. So if you don't develop these habits early in your career, it can really damage you later on. And a perfect example is product recalls. So we see in the news where a large recall happens. And so I think most people are familiar with Bluebell ice cream in Texas, where listeria and people died as a result of these type of things. There was a recent study from Forbes magazine that pointed out that the average cost, this is just the average actual cost of a recall, is $30 million.
Wow.
So if you're a food company, there's not many companies that can survive that. That's probably going to put you out of business. So those decision-making processes that you develop early on in your career really come into play then. So if you're in charge of quality assurance for a company and there's a recall, essentially you're the person running the company at that point in time. And one of the key lessons I learned in my career, because I've had to deal with recalls in my career, no one wants it.
Yeah.
And it's kind of that nightmare scenario that you hope never happens, but occasionally it does. And you have to be prepared to deal with that, and you train and you work on it. And the key lesson, and it really circles back to that management mini lesson, is it becomes extremely important at that point in time to be able to analyze the data, because the initial information you get back on the situation is going to be partial. You'll have some information. You'll have rumors or other information, and you have to decide very quickly, how do I act on that? So you have to be able to have the discipline to take a deep breath and sit back and say, what do we really know? Do we really have an issue or not? And if you do, you need to act decisively and then move forward and not question that decision. But if you think there's something that may not be quite right, you need to investigate it. I had a potential recall issue early in my career where that happened, and it turned out to be wrong. It wasn't a recall. The product was fine. The product was safe. It was the people who were telling me that it was unsafe that were wrong. Now, if I would have acted and just said, oh, geez, this is terrible, I would have actually damaged the company, caused harm to the brand, and irreparably damaged that relationship with our customers and that trust we built.
Yeah. So wait for the data to come in, get so you can actually make a decision, and not based on the fear of your career on the line, your job, the future of your life after this, in this nightmarish scenario. I mean, oh my gosh, man, I can't. That sounds something I would never ever want to be part of.
Yeah, quality assurance is an interesting field in that if you do everything correct in your job, no one notices. It's not like the salesperson who goes out and gets the new account and gets $1 million in sales. If quality is doing what the customer expects and they're making safe products that everybody enjoys, it's just assumed that happens. But there's an incredible amount of work that goes on behind the scenes to make sure that does happen.
Yeah. I can relate a little bit to that, to my life story, and that is for one time I was an audio engineer for a while, and the biggest audiences I probably did sound for was between 5,000 and 6,000 people. And then when there's like that feedback on stage, that ringing, that beep, right, that's starting to happen, you just start to instantly freak out because you have to find it as fast as possible and find out, okay, I have this giant board with 35 inputs coming into it, and just find out solo each one of them while this music is still going on, so you don't destroy what's the art, the music that's happening very quickly. And when the sound is perfect, then no one notices the sound guy and everybody's happy. Yeah. But if all of a sudden the sound is bad, then I have all of this attention, which I don't want, and
all eyes turn to you.
Yes. And that's the worst thing in the world, is to have all of that focus all of a sudden. I want to just slip in, slip out, and everybody enjoy the show. And it's all about the artist on the stage. Yeah.
I mean, that's what's amazing about the world that we live in, is everybody's doing that, right? Everybody does all these different types of things to make all of this work, and it's amazing.
So that's from chapter 1, the philosophy of business. What else would people learn in that chapter? I mean, that's just one little snippet.
So part of what I'm trying to do here as well, too, is give a different perspective for people. Is that part of the lessons I learned early in my life is that everyone has a philosophical viewpoint of how you view the world, the rules of the game that you play by. Most people are unaware of what they are, but we all have them. You either pick them up from your parents, right? You go to the same church your parents go to because, well, that's how you were brought up, right? It's very rare that someone, let's say a Baptist, runs off and becomes a Buddhist, right? It's how you're brought up. And when you ask people why, they generally don't have an answer. So part of what I'm doing in this section of the book is helping people to start down that path. And so Aristotle, which the title of the chapter, this section is dealing with, is really in Greek philosophy. There was two main dueling viewpoints, Plato and Aristotle. And one was a student of the other, and they had very different ways of looking at things. Aristotle's viewpoint was essentially this worldly. This is the world. These are things as they are. He's very famous for the phrase A is A. A thing is what it is. And it's our job in the world to determine the nature of things and integrate that knowledge into how we operate. The other view was Plato, which is very common, which is the world that we see isn't really the world. It's a world of shadows. The real world is something outside of this that we're not able to perceive. And you see that in conversation with people all the time of how they view things. And it's important understanding how people view things, especially within a management standpoint, of how you're dealing with people. So if you can look at people, so essentially it's like Myers-Briggs or anything else, ISTJs and stuff like this. If you can look at people and understand their basic philosophical viewpoint of how they're looking at the world, it helps develop that relationship so you can understand where they're coming from.
Totally. Do you find yourself more in one camp versus the other, Plato versus Aristotle, or do you feel like those are just two philosophies that you just have and you see it appear in different ways? Or
No, I'm in the Aristotle camp.
Okay.
Yeah.
Why is that? Why are you in that group?
So as people in the world, there's three things that anybody is trying to do. And we're all answering these three questions all the time internally, which is, what is it? How do I know? And what do I do about it? So this starts very early in our lives. So we are born, my viewpoint is sort of the Latin phrase tabula rasa, so blank slate. It's our job then to figure out what the world is around us. The world doesn't care that we're here, right? The world didn't care when we weren't, right? Things operated in a certain way, and they continue to operate in a certain way. And it's our job to learn the rules of the game. So as a child, we may reach up and accidentally touch a hot stove, and we quickly recall and we figure out and learn that lesson. The information that we have in our body through our senses, we have to figure that out. So when you're an infant, and a lot of times when you're holding a newborn or things like this, and you see how they're looking at the world, you can just tell by looking at their eyes, they don't see what we see.
Yeah.
They are looking at an upside down world of swirls of colors and things that they have no idea what they are. And at that point in time, that person is still developing. And really consciousness begins when they start figuring out that swirling color in front of them is their mother. And they start identifying what things are and figuring out those three questions for the world. And from my viewpoint, I'm a strong proponent of this, is that we have to understand those rules of the game. And fire is hot, and fish live in water, and the sky is blue, and all these type of things. And over the millennia, we've developed more and more knowledge. And that circle of things that are unknown, that we don't have any ability to ascribe to, gets smaller and smaller. So our knowledge continues to grow. And the only way we grow our knowledge is by having that basic viewpoint. So from a Platonic view, how do you understand and grow your knowledge if what you're observing isn't actually real? It creates a gigantic roadblock.
Yeah, I see it. That's fascinating. Let's jump to chapter 2, the consumer, your ultimate boss. And I just picked another management mini lesson here. This is inside the headline section, Project Resource Pipeline. And the management mini lesson is, exemplar management doesn't get caught in the day-to-day processes. Instead, you develop out your pipeline, planning further ahead for years to come. So, yeah, I don't even really know where you're going with that one. And so I thought, if you can explain that one, is this an important concept?
Yeah, so I'll give some backstory on what
context.
This is referring to.
Yes.
So within companies, you have a process for how you build new products. So we'll continue with my example. I work in food. So part of what companies need to do, any good company, is trying to figure out what consumers want. What's the next pumpkin spice latte or whatever it is.
Yeah.
And they're constantly out there trying to figure out what these things are. So within companies, you have what's known as a product development pipeline, design and control. What is it that consumers want? Can we make it? Can we make money at it? Can we deliver it? Is this something we have expertise in? All these type of questions. And there are many, many different ideas. We go through this in life. All of us do, right? You have all kinds of different potential options of things that you can do, but it doesn't mean you should do them all. So how do you figure out what are those different things as a company that you should be working on? And then putting the resources to doing that. Now, part of what I'm trying to reference within this section as well is your ultimate judge of this is, once again, that consumer. And a lot of times companies get too involved internally on what they think is that's good. So for me, a good example of this was early on. So I worked for a French cheese company. And we would get together and have product cutting. So you get samples of all your different products from the marketplace and whatever. And you get together all the senior leadership and the CEO, and you have a giant table with all these different products, and you taste them. And so what you're doing is you're trying to figure out, is this right? Is this what we should be making? And you should be measuring that against what the consumer expects. Is this the product that the consumer would want to eat? Are we meeting their expectations? But what happens a lot of time is, because you're internally focused, is the CEO will take a bite of the cheese, and everybody turns to look at the CEO to see how he reacts. And if the CEO loves it, wow, life is good. Right? If not, everybody goes, oh, we'll have to fix that. Right?
Yeah.
Bottom line is, who cares? We're not selling product to the CEO. His personal preferences, frankly, are irrelevant.
Right.
So companies that get caught in that trap of internal evaluation can get sideways very quickly. So, for example, with Brie cheese, this is very interesting how this all works. So in Europe, Brie, they expect the cheese to be very soft and runny. So when you cut into the Brie cheese, it's kind of ooey and gooey and everything else.
Yeah.
And this is really a function of how you make the cheese and the bacteria you use for the culture to grow the cheese. And because Europe is relatively small compared to the US, they're able to get it to the market very quickly. And so the product turnaround is very fast. And plus, in Europe, if you're in France, they eat lots of Brie.
Yeah.
Now, here in the U.S., completely different story. Giant country, large amounts of distance to travel, longer turnaround time on the shelf. So they have to take all those factors into account. Plus, they did research that figured out that Americans really didn't like that ooey, gooey kind of texture. So they wanted something a little firmer. So you have to adjust those parameters. Now, if you're a French cheesemaker, oh my God, this is heresy. This is not how you make cheese. Well, it is in the U.S. And we had the market data to show that's how the U.S. expected their Brie to be.
That explains why when I've gotten Brie here, it's firmer, and why when I've had it in Europe, it's like softer and gooier.
Absolutely. So one of the things I've always taught my managers is, when do customers complain? So if you're a person in the marketplace buying something, there's only really two situations where people complain. The first, it doesn't meet their expectations. So, hey, this cheese is gooey. What the heck? The second is, and this is the weird one, is it's changed. So you could be making a terrible product, but if you change it and make it better and you don't explain that to the consumer ahead of time, you're going to get complaints because you've changed an expectation. Whether you like McDonald's hamburgers or not, you know exactly what you're going to get when you go there.
And that's the quality assurance piece of it. What else can people learn in this chapter 2, the consumer? I guess they're going to learn about the focus should be on the consumer, and that applies to all businesses.
Yeah. It doesn't matter what you're doing within your organization. You're tied to the consumer in some way.
Chapter 3 is quality systems. What makes your world go round? So systems, systems are so important in everything that we do, right? Your morning routine, how your habits, systems that you have in place. So this is from, I randomly chose it, so we're going to go into it. It's the aftermath, so I'm not sure what we're even getting into. Management mini lesson: you can't set up systems that you wish would work. People will continue doing things the way they were trained. You can write as many documents as you want, but until you change the behavior, you are going to fail. Oh man, this is an emotional one.
So this was a key learning for me early in my career. So early in our conversation, we talked about when I went to Pennsylvania. So I became head of quality assurance for a food company, $300 million company. I just turned 32 years old and had no idea what to do. And we had just had an audit when I was brand new in the job. I was there barely, not even 2 weeks. And we had a major audit. So audits occur in the food industry. People from the outside who don't work for the company come in and look at how you do stuff and then give you a score. So I was like, okay, you got 95 out of 100 or whatever. So I came into this audit with no preparation. And the auditor who came in really didn't have any experience in what we did. He came from automotive. So an automotive auditor was trying to audit a cheese company.
Wow.
So his understanding of how we did things was even less. And the audit was an absolute disaster. And we barely passed. And the only reason we passed is, I think, is because he took pity on us. And I mean, it was just one question after another. And the person who had wrote the quality systems for this facility had been promoted into the plant manager. So he was still there. So he was helping out with the audit. And so the auditor would ask a question and say, well, according to your procedures, it says here that you have a monthly meeting to review quality. I'd like to see the records for those reviews, right? So the auditor is checking to make sure you do what you say you're doing.
Right.
And so the plant manager said, well, yeah, we were going to do that, but we never started that.
Oh.
Right. So you said you were going to do something, but you never actually did it. So the auditor has no choice but to, all right, well, fine. You said I'm going to write you up because you're not doing what you say.
Yeah.
That continued on through the entire audit. And so by the time it was done, I had a giant laundry list of things that were wrong. And then this began a 2-year process for me because I really stepped back and looked at why. Why did the system fail? According to everything that I've been taught so far, this should work, but it failed miserably. So I tried to step away from a lot of my day-to-day stuff and gave that to more of my staff and said, I really need to dig into this. And so I worked with an employee from the floor in this production facility to investigate to find out why. It was an amazing process. And I would make a discovery and try it, and that would fail. And I would make another one and try it and fail. And this went on for 2 years. I was working, so I would do my normal job, and then I would stay in the plant and do other stuff. And so I was working 80, 90, 100 hours a week trying to figure this out.
Wow.
And that really what I learned is what you're talking about here within the book. And this is what I'm trying to teach, in that the lessons I learned in this are not how things are normally done in plants. And the key thing here that we're talking about is there's a view, and this is what this mini lesson is about, is there's a view that if I write something, people will do it. So someone sits in their office and writes a document and says, here in this company, we'll do this and this and this and this. And then they take it out and give it to everybody, and they read it, and everybody goes, that's not what we do. And it gets ignored. And then the person who wrote it wonders why. So they write something else, and the same process repeats. And the key thing that they're missing is they're not involving those people. Right? So when you're writing this documentation, it's not you wishing how things should be, which is why we got wrote up so much in that audit. It's how do we actually do things, and then figuring out how do you modify that over time. So you have to start with that base. And the only way to understand that is to go out and talk with the people who actually do it.
I want to go back to that Pluto thing, right? Wouldn't that be where the decision maker thinks things are operating in a certain way, but he's only seeing the shadow of the reality of what's really out there?
Right. Yeah. So that's a good observation. So the Platonic view would be, this is how things should be. This is how the world should operate. This is the nominal world associated with another philosopher, Kant. And therefore, I'm going to impose this upon reality and make it bend to my will. Reality doesn't care what you wish. It never has, and it never will. You have to bend to reality, right? So Francis Bacon, nature to be commanded must be obeyed. In order to have success, you have to understand the framework and the criteria of what you're dealing with, and then act accordingly within that. Back to Aristotle.
It seems like a lot of people get all bent out of shape because they don't get what they want, or they feel that they deserve something because the world owes it to them. And I think people feel there's a lot of pain and struggle. And you've just said this now a couple of times. The world just doesn't care. It was fine before, and after your existence, it's still going to be fine again.
So I think, and this is kind of an interesting tie-in. So we're at an entrepreneurial meeting this week, and part of it is, so within the entrepreneurial world, you have a lot of viewpoints around, yoga and meditating and these type of things, which I think are good tools. And I think they're good tools, and it's a unique combination in that within meditation, there's tools, and you're very knowledgeable in these areas, of a lot of pain that people have is trying to project their expectations for that person upon other people. And, so you'll see it in marriages, for example. So if a husband is behaving in a way that the wife doesn't like, that can cause a ton of strife. She has an internal expectation of how he should be. And then that's projected out and causes grief and everything else. So why? He is what he is. So no one can change anyone but yourself. And the idea that you can, and you see this manifested in those documents. That's the belief that if you write something, you're modifying people's behavior by doing that, and you're not.
And they need to get the people that actually do the work involved in that. That's hard to do, to get those people who are running the line and whatever, like, involved in those decision-making processes. I mean, they're doing their job, and like, but if you want to involve them because they see how things really are, that's not easy to do as a manager. But you were able to, for 2 years, make, what would be one of those ways that you were able to kind of gather data from the real world and then create policies and systems that, like, really did fix it for the next time the auditor came around, and hopefully you got a good score.
Right. So what I did is I actually went in and sat down and talked with different people and said, how do you do your job? And something very interesting came about in that, and this applies to everyone. If you do something, this is just like me being a microbiologist in the lab, you automate. You do a task and you become good at it, and it becomes second nature. Earlier, you'd referenced getting up in the morning and morning rituals. So life would be much more difficult if you didn't have your morning ritual. You know where your toothbrush is, and you know everything, and you just go through the ritual. You don't even think about it.
Yeah,
it's the same at work. And what I found is that as I would question people for particular job functions, that for them it was automatic. So that makes it very difficult for them to train other people. So, for example, receiving. So in a plant, right, you have a function where people bring in stuff, right? So you need, if you're going to make cheese, you need milk and salt and cultures and all these other type of things that go into making cheese. You have to receive that stuff in. There's a process for that. So if you sit down, so what I would do is I would sit down with all the people who receive. And so let's say there's 10 people. I say, okay, guys, I'm the new guy. Teach me. I'm the new receiver. How do I receive? Invariably, the answer I always got back first was a dumbfounded look, where they would look at me and say, well, what do you mean? And I'm like, well, how do you receive? Let's take an example. Let's bring in milk. How do you guys bring in a milk truck? Well, we back it in, we bring it in. Right?
Yeah.
Right. So from their viewpoint, that's all it was, because the entire process was automated. But bringing in milk is a complex procedure. And so I'm like, no. All right. So how do you actually know that milk is there? Does somebody honk their horn outside or what? It's like, oh, well, we get a schedule for what's coming in for the day from the procurement group. Ah, interesting. So then I drag that whole process out of them. And through that process, I find out the decision points. So, for example, one of the key criteria for raw milk coming into a plant is temperature. It's very important to keep the milk cold. So those trucks that you see rolling down the road have very strict parameters around that. And let's say, for example, this number is probably a little bit high, but we'll use it for this, is 45 degrees, right? The milk has to be colder than 45 degrees. So one of the first things they have to do after they remove the security measures and things like that to make sure the milk is safe, they're going to check the temperature of the milk. So I'm like, okay, great. How do you guys do that? Well, we open up the top hatch. Great. Well, what do you do next? Well, we take a thermometer. Well, where'd you get the thermometer from? Oh, well, we've got that stored over here. Well, how do you store it? Well, we keep it in sanitizer to make sure it's clean. And then, okay, great. So this process takes a long time. Once they get the hang of what you're doing, and it starts speeding up. But in the beginning, it's pulling teeth because for them, it's automatic. And the key criteria, and this applies for any process, for anybody, for any job, it just happens, my experience is in dairy manufacturing, is once you understand that process and the parameters you're measuring, so temperature and whatever else, what should it be? And this is where every other quality system I've seen doesn't do this, and this is what I teach in my book, is what do you do if it's not right? So it comes in at 47 degrees. What do you do? Do you shrug your shoulders and bring it in? We ordered the milk for a reason. We need to make cheese, right? What's the process of going through that and determining whether that's okay to bring in or not?
Because 99 out of 100 times it's fine, but then one of those times it's not. It's out of boundaries, out of range, and they probably don't really know what the correct answer is, what to do. Right.
So this was one of my first epiphany moments when I was creating this new quality system and figuring out what was wrong with the old one. So on that milk temperature example, so 45 or less is great. So I started talking with the guys and said, okay, when do you start getting worried? And this conversation now was a management conversation. So I took this information from the receiving guys and sat down with the management team for the plant. So the plant manager and the quality manager and the operations manager, and said, okay, guys, The receivers are telling me that our specification for milk is less than 45. And they're like, yep, that's right. Okay, great. What if the milk's 47? And they're like, okay. And so we talked about it. I said, well, here's all the type of things that can go wrong and et cetera. Okay, so we need to kind of evaluate this and make a decision. Yes. Okay, great. Where does that cut off? And for this example, we'll say 50 degrees. Okay. All right, guys. So anything higher than 50 degrees or warmer, too hot. They're like, oh, God, yes. Well, I'm like, well, why? Because at that point in time, bacteria starts growing like crazy. Those bacteria produce proteolytic enzymes, which break down the milk. So this is the type of stuff that curdles your milk when you see it in your fridge.
Right.
Now, that's important for making cheese. That's part of that process. But in the raw milk, that's very bad. So your quality of your milk at that point is not acceptable. So this goes back to the customer chapter. Now, you're going to produce product that's going to cause complaints. So we got consensus and said, okay, we all agree now, milk 45 or less, awesome, we love it. Milk between 46 and 49, we may have a problem. As a management team, we need to look at that and all the different criteria with the milk to determine if it's okay or not. 50 or higher, forget it. Reject it. It's never going to be used. It doesn't matter. So that was a key distinction within this process. So that decision-making ability within the plant was now created based upon an out-of-specification scenario. Normally, it's always just, what do we do when things go right? And then what happens is decisions are made on the floor that management doesn't know about. So it would go like this in these two different scenarios. So milk comes in one day at 46. And let's say that we didn't do any of this process. And the quality department said, all right, milk needs to be 45 degrees or less. And we put up posters and we train people and all these type of things, which is how it's normally done. Well, milk comes in one day at 46. So the receiver goes, oh, geez. And so the supervisor comes over and says, hey, what's wrong? It's like, hey, boss, my milk's too warm. What? What is it? 46. So now the supervisor's thinking, oh, man, this is really going to screw up my day.
Yeah.
If I don't bring this milk in, I can't make cheese. We can't make cheese. We can't package the cheese. And the plant manager is going to be yelling at me, this is bad, 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 bad.
Yeah.
So he starts quizzing the receiver. Said, okay, well, did you do everything right? Oh, yeah, absolutely. Took the right sample. I followed the right procedure. The thermometer's calibrated. Everything is good. This milk is 46 degrees. It's too warm. So that goes through the chain of command in the plant. And eventually this story gets repeated and it goes to the plant manager. And the plant manager gets all the data and goes, oh, cheese, right? So he's thinking the same thing. Now his boss is going to be yelling at him because cheese isn't being made. So he picks up the phone and calls the milk co-op that supplied the milk to the plant. He said, hey guys, what's going on? You sent us warm milk. Co-op says, yep, sorry. Totally our fault. We had an equipment problem. It wasn't cooling as well as it should have. It's been fixed. It's just that one truck. Everything else is good. That milk is fine. You should bring it in. So the plant manager says, all right, don't let it happen again. And slams down the phone. Now he calls the quality manager into his office and says, hey, quality manager, did you hear about this warm milk? Yeah, I heard about that. 46? Yep. We're going to bring it in. And the quality manager goes, well, no, it's too warm. It's over 45. Now the plant manager starts working on the quality manager and say, hey, come on. You know this milk is okay. It's only 1 degree too high. It's not going to cause any problems. Do you really want to shut this plant down? Which puts the quality manager in a really bad spot. So the quality manager goes, well, okay, you're probably right. It's not going to cause any issues. I agree. I'll allow you to bring the milk in. So the word goes back down to the floor. And the receiver is told, bring the milk in. So now the receiver says, well, that's great. I have this thing on the wall that says less than 45. And now they're making me break the rules. Nobody cares about rules. It's all about making product, and who cares about it just is a terrible scenario. So the next time that the quality manager tries to do something and set up a rule, that guy's going to roll his eyes and go, yeah, whatever. That applies until the next time we break it. Now, the previous scenario that I laid out for you with those 3 zones is what we put in place. So it's the exact same thing. We just put into advance what we were going to do when that decision-making process occurred. So the receiver understood, okay, milk's 46. My job as the receiver now is to gather all the information and give it to management so they can make a decision. So the plant manager and the quality manager, they all get together and they talk about it. And they're like, no, okay, the milk's at 46. We understand why. The co-op is going to fix the problem. It's not going to cause an issue. I'm comfortable with this. We will allow this milk to come in. They tell the receiver, and the receiver goes, okay, good. Right? He's done his job. He's informed management, and management's done their job. Now milk comes in at 51.
Mm-hmm.
And we already know as a team that that's a big problem.
Mm-hmm.
So now if the plant manager tries to bring that milk in, that conversation with the quality manager is very different.
Mm-hmm.
So the plant manager says, hey, we need to bring this milk in. It's only 51 degrees. It's only 1 degree above 50. Now the quality manager can say, well, hold on a minute here. We've already talked about all this. We already know that this milk is going to cause a problem.
Mm-hmm.
It's going to cause complaints and all kinds of grief.
Mm-hmm.
Do you have any other additional information as plant manager that now all of a sudden makes this milk okay? The plant manager's like, well, not really. It's like, tell you what, let's call corporate and maybe you can explain to them why you think this is now okay, which isn't going to happen.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a very subtle shift in how you do things, and it makes all the world of difference. Mm-hmm. Because you're identifying early in the process where the issue is and prevent it from going through the system. Because if that bad milk was allowed to come in and make bad cheese, what can you do then? Nothing. It's garbage. So you're just wasting money. And we developed that system out for everything within the plant. And I'm spending a lot of time telling the story because I think it's so important. It can be applied to pretty much anything that you're doing when you're building out systems, is to think about what do we do if this doesn't work the way we expect? And how do we react as a group associated with those things? Now let's put all that together and then all agree to it. And if things change over time, great. We'll adjust it accordingly. But this is how we're going to act, and we're all in agreement.
So that can be applied to other industries and how customers react to your product or service, what the plan is when things go awry or a little off the rails.
Right. Well, that's why, Gabriel, it becomes so important to understand what is it that the consumer wants. Because those become very rigid standards in that system. Because now everybody understands that if we do that, we're going to cause complaints. So the plant then understands where do we dig our heels in to make sure that things go the way they should. Because a lot of times what we think is important internally is not what is actually important externally. Mm-hmm. So it really doesn't matter if you're making cheese or a house or even software products. It doesn't matter. There's always 4 stages to how something is made. There's a receiving process, processing, so you take what you received and you do something to it, packaging, and then a shipping fulfillment function associated with that. And everybody passes off their work product in that to the person downstream.
Let's go to the last chapter here, something in there. Section 4, People and Development Pivot Points. Let's see. Management mini lesson. A hire is not just about intelligence and skills. Personality is very important too. That seems like an obvious management lesson, right? I mean,
I hope so.
Yeah. Soft skills, right, are important too. Personality, soft skills. And a lot of people are doing VAs and stuff these days and SaaS. And, but hiring is that's a whole thing right there. That whole process and getting it right. I know people who are just starting off as entrepreneurs and they have their first hire, and like getting that right person, is super important, right? It's a big, scary moment, like actually hiring somebody for a few,
Well, it goes back to one of the reasons why entrepreneurs in most cases make terrible CEOs. Because the skill set of building a company is different than the skill set of running a company. And so the smart ones a lot of times will back away. Now there's exceptions to that rule, Steve Jobs and things like this who are good at both. But look at how rocky his career was and how at times he would be very brusque and run over people and everything else. And that's part of what we celebrate with Steve Jobs in that particular example. But
he got fired and then rehired, right?
Yeah.
So
it was crazy. But one of the dangers that I always teach my people is people have a tendency to hire people like them. So if you're a hard-charging entrepreneur who's willing to take big risks and lay it all out there every week and everything else, and you're ready to move on to the next challenge and I'll let other people worry about the last thing, and you have a group of people around you like that who are just like you, that's a recipe for success. For failure. You are going to absolutely implode. If you're an engineer your tendency is when you interview people to say, I really like that guy. He's rock solid. He's analytical. I relate to him. He'd be an excellent division, for my team. Now, if you end up with a whole bunch of analytical people on your team, it's the same problem. Now nothing gets done because everybody is overanalyzing everything and nobody can make a decision. So you have to build out a team and be very aware of who you're bringing in, which is why I bring out that personality point, which is not necessarily obvious. You need to be very aware of who you're building out around your team and for what you need them to do. Personality-wise, how are they fitting in with the overall persona of the group? Are they going to be a hard-charging, pants on fire, I'll worry about decisions later type person? If so, how does that integrate in with the rest of your team? So they may have all of, an amazing resume with all kinds of skills.
But that's not what you want for like customer service position.
Right. They may burn everything to the ground around you. Right? You also need people within your team then that are aligned with what you want to do.
Yeah.
So if they're not, and they're a rogue and they're out there on their own and they have their own ideas, that's going to cause incredible grief.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I'll tease your readers here at something in here. So within that section, there's one question I always ask at every interview I've ever given. And I've hired tons and tons of people over the years. And the answers to this question are extremely revealing. And that's included in the book.
Ooh, good stuff. Good stuff. Yeah. So if you want to know what that question is, go out and check out this book, The New Manager Mindset. Bryan Armentrout, Armentrout. You can get it on Amazon and your website.
So you can go to newmanagermindset.com, get more information on the book there. And then the free offer, which will be up for a while, is FSMA Expert, FSMA Expert.com.
Cool, man. Thanks for this. Thanks for being on the show today. It was awesome talking with you and just going into this whole subject here. And I appreciate your time.
Oh, that was great. I love it. Thanks for having me on. I appreciate it.
Yeah. Thanks, Bryan. See ya.
Bye.